My name is Paul Pedron, and I'm here today with Arvin Torrey to co-present detailed information on the system health checks for your ZENworks zone. We're part of the U.S. Technical Support Backline support. You may have talked to us one time or another. We have a very packed hour of information to help keep you ZENworks zone healthy, if we can call it that. We're going to be keeping a watchful eye in chat for any questions you may have. Feel free to chat them out. And we always wonder as we maintain our zone, how many wonder what is the health of my zone, or is that normal? How can I optimize my zone? So this presentation should cover some aspects of keeping a ZENworks zone stable and in a healthy state. So we're going to start from the, let's say 10,000 foot view level and move to some specifics. And there'll be a lot of detail in these slides, and we may not cover them specifically because we only have so much time. But we'll feel free to chat out different things should you need to, if we're missing something or you need a particular detail. But understanding your system environment obviously is crucial to the health of your zone. And another thing is documenting your zone eases the pain of remembering how things tie together, right? You have external and internal types of services and systems that are attached to your zone. There are some items that are fire and forget, and there are some items that are fire and forget, and other items external to your environment that are out of your control even. But overall, the zone continues to evolve as new features are used and put into place. Once we understand your environment, we can determine what to monitor for health purposes. Once you've identified those areas, it will lead to optimizing and improving performance by tuning the zone to your environment. One fits all isn't in play here typically because everyone's zone is different. Different variables use different applications and different features within the ZENworks. We'll try to cover the main course and have appetizers along the way for you to review should it fit your environment. And they can be referenced here. Before we can monitor, we need to know what are some of the components the zone consists of. Again, no two zones are identical because of collect your statistics, number of devices, primary satellites, their roles, locations, network environments, etc. Licensing and registration status and system updates. So identifying these components is very important. Other things like system update status, making sure that's 100% across the board. Certificate authority. You have ZCC folder hierarchy and schedules. Oh, so many schedules. Refresh, inventory, collection, purge, patch. You want to keep those, understanding what those are and when they're happening. Deployment and discovery tasks. We have subscriptions, zone components in use like auditing or patching, endpoint security, and of course the ZCM and imaging. So here we have an architecture of ZENworks, and this is just like I said, a 10,000 foot view. You have all the different components. You have your databases, you have your primary server, satellite servers, end nodes. Are they connected to satellites? Are they connected to primaries? So this kind of gives you an idea of a large view. Having something like this for your organization is good because then you could see who's talking to who, and when the system updates might be occurring or the refresh schedules are occurring, and understanding that. So this is just an overall diagram for that. We're going to check some more components. So in the ZENworks zone, there are like physical devices that make up the zone, the primary servers, database, satellites, as we saw on that last screen. But we also have a variety of operating systems, individually or shared RAM, disk, etc. Then there's system and service related components, updates, auditing we talked earlier about. But then you have the databases, the managed devices, and then what's in play, the services and protocols, LDAP, DNS, contracts, licensing, subscriptions. Are you using the ActiveSync or the Apple notification service or the Google notification service? So there's so many things in play. Knowing your environment is just so critical, being able to know what those components are. along with services and protocols like LDAP, including those under user connections, eDirectory, the replica and AD. We're going to move on to tools available to monitor primary servers. That one advanced a little quick, but we'll move on. Why is monitoring important? So all this is documented and probed and monitored so that the baseline is drawn and improvements and optimization can take place. By monitoring, you have known condition, and it gives you the foundation needed for which you can improve the various elements within your environment. Once there is a deviation from the baseline, then you can reactively and proactively address issues seen in the horizon. For instance, as features are enabled or disabled, roles are added or removed, or you're moving to a new system, moving primaries, upgrading databases, keeping that baseline, it will continue to evolve, and tuning will be an essential part of optimizing the system performance. So being able to monitor this is very important. To do so, we have the ZENworks Appliance Console. If you're on an appliance, it has its own console, and on Linux and Windows, you have your native services that you can regulate. Since the appliance is designed to be streamlined, the ZENworks primary server, it has its own set of tools and settings. So this is what it looks like if you're not familiar with that. Ganglia is also included in the ZENworks appliance and must be enabled to work, but we have that for monitoring as well. And once it's enabled, you can effectively see the performance. Also use ZENworks Diagnostics for monitoring. On all primary servers, the diagnostic page is available to the zone. You can see a multitude of things in here, as well as all the services for each one of the primaries if it's contacting the server. If you hover over the different symbols, you can actually get some statistics. And going further, we have a dashboard for this, but you can also check and monitor resources like memory threads, database connections, usage per process under each ZENworks server. And as you dig deeper with the ZENworks probe, you can get some threads, system connectors. You can actually get Java dumps. This is where you do dumping threads, and you view information about the Java processes and running threads, applications, and response times. So there's TIDs out there that can help you understand and how to diagnose this. If you're having thread issues or Java issues, you can do that. It also shows some database connectivity issues. Using third-party tools for monitoring is also available. There's a NetIQ App Manager that will do that. It will check for file counts in a given directory, services running, fake URL requests, etc. So this works really, really well, monitoring the database connections along with database memory, CPUs, and table sizes. So this particular one is a third-party app that actually Micro Focus has. And it'll also attempt to restart those stopped services and send a note to admin. But if you wanted to move forward and use another third-party tool, there's things like Nagios and Icinga. It's an open source and provides script-based monitoring services. Again, it can monitor for services and do similar things that the NetIQ NetApp can do. And Visual VM is also available to monitor most of the same items. So some of those things you can set up in your environment to actually watch and monitor along with the native tools that are with the OS. I'm going to now turn it over to Arvind for zone monitoring and health checks. Arvind?
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so when it comes to monitoring, monitoring ZENworks environment consistently helps to avoid any kind of system outages or downtimes due to resource unavailability and keeps your ZENworks environment stable. So Some of those areas would be like checking your messages and hot list view that are available to see if there is any pending issue. In our experience, there are not usually very serious issues that may affect enterprise or your ZENworks environment and may not need urgent attention, but however needs some time to time periodic attention to see if there is any potential problems going on with your bundles, devices, or policies that kind of generating any sort of critical warning messages. You can also look for the compliant statuses, which is basically tells you whether how many devices are non-compliant due to bundles or policy failures, any error warning messages. Uh, Apart from that, there is sometimes we see the LDAP connectivity causing problems where sometimes changing the LDAP user password, or if it gets expired or disabled, all user authentication stops. So this authentication is used by ZENworks and not controlled by ZENworks. So the user ID can get disabled on the LDAP sometime or get disabled or moved. So along with the LDAP certificate that sometime get changed or get expired. So these are crucial for ZENworks functioning for LDAP and authentication purposes. And also sometimes it may require tuning depending on the load on the LDAP server, whether it be caching and changing the LDAP caching values or defining the user containers properly for your zone so that the end user don't see too much delay when routing through the LDAP request. Replica configuration for optimal performance and load balancing if you have more than one LDAP server and you have different remote sites talking to your local LDAP replicas. But yeah, I do refer to best practices guide for comprehensive details. We do cover a lot of different areas there. On the certificate part, you would often see that we provide a certificate warning, notifications, and expirations for any sort of changes. Certificates are typically for server-to-server communication. It could be between server and authentication satellites in your zone, or it could be primary servers to your managed devices. So it's vital to have the communication between your devices and your servers intact, and we do see that if you're internal, external, depending on your validity of the certificate, you might have to take actions once they're going to get expired, or if any kind of changes going in the environment that needs certificates to get re-minted. So do look for those certificate warning nags that typically occurs 90 days before the expiration dates and the weekly thereafter. Do plan to take certificate backup. This is one-time activity. Once you remint your certificates, it's good to have a backup that you can rely on later. There's some other areas where you can definitely check the connectivity for your managed devices across in your zone across all your devices. It could be a satellite servers and primary servers. So from update 3, there's already a dashboard that can provide a nice view to see devices based on their last contact, and you can see all other attributes of the devices as well. You can take some corrective actions, and it has some drill down capabilities where you can generate report, or you can modify and search. So those kind of dashboards helps to really look at the communication, how your agents are talking to your servers, and what kind of devices are sitting there which are not being used. For messages and inventory, often the messages for bundles and policies that do occur that in the ZCC that can be viewed in the system messages area. So if you go to configuration, there's system messages where you can see if there's any critical warning messages. If there's a critical, you can take corrective actions or ignore the messages if you know the message is not impactful, and you can filter by date. Also, with respect to inventory device, hardware and software inventory usage reports can track the status of licensed products in the zone, if they're meeting any kind of compliance with respect to your products that's kind of configured in the inventory asset management. So and along with this, patch management dashboard also provides with a device batch scans or compliance statuses. In 2020, this is enhanced with a CV vulnerability dashboard to get better understanding of vulnerability of your devices in your zone and rapidly addressing the zero-day vulnerabilities. So those are some of the go-to places to check for the dashboards and messages in the ZCC. Auditing is one area where you can leverage and control the admin and other admin activities. Whether it could be endpoint devices or it could be your ZENworks zone administration from the end user. So you can keep a watch on who's doing what in the zone and then monitor changes for any sort of admins. See in a glance if an agent is failing or if notifications can be set up for bundle failures or any kind of deletions or configuration changes that can happen. And you can be notified through email, SMTP, or send a centralized messages to the syslog server. So but definitely the auditing dashboard is can be set up, and this information can be used for any sort of monitoring purpose. You can also use a reporting server to get these data get reported and sent to you through schedule. So you can also generate reports on audit using reporting server if needed. Some of those areas when it comes to monitoring and health checks is monitoring the health check of your content system. Now, before that, you need to different admins would be creating different contents in a zone, and then it's important to check the content is actually syncing down to all your satellite servers, primary servers, if you have multiple servers in the zone. So what content typically comprises of is your system update, could be content, your bundles, policies, patches, all these are content that sits within the content repo. So you have to ensure that they are available before you start deploying. Like here, in case you have primary server and a satellite server, for the case of system update, before you start updating your satellites, make sure your contents got replicated to all your satellites 100%. Like in this case, it's showing 0%. So wait for them to replicate and then start deploying system updates. Likewise, for bundles, it's always good to wait for the status to get available for all your primary servers and your satellite servers. In the second screen, if you see that the bundles are available on the primary server, but in the third, they're not available on the satellite server. So if you start deploying those bundles to your agents, it might fail because it might request for content and that content may be missing due to the data not sync. So always good to, and this is something that is more useful if you're doing a short-term deployment. If your satellites are already replicating content in the duration and the window that you have configured, then probably it's not a major thing to always watch for. For short-term deployment, definitely keep an eye, and you can also do a search if you need on the ZCC for unavailable content. With respect to reporting, you can use reporting server to generate create a simple report on bundle replication status across all the content servers in the zone. So you don't have to go to every bundle and find their status on the primary server and satellite server. There were reporting server, that's where it comes handy, where you can create a report and get the overall view of your zone. When it comes to monitoring and health checks on your device for satellite server, agents, and database, some of those key areas is that as an admin in the ZCC, how can I check if my device is running agent service? So you can just go to the device in the browser and you can type this URL and provide the agent IP address here. And because the agent is always listening on 762.8 port with a are you running service running, you can open in a browser and check if the agent is responding. You can also check the web service status on a satellite server where satellite server does certain roles like collection, authentication, and content. It does have to run a web server on port 80 for any kind of content and collection tasks. So in that case, you can use a ping tool, which you can request us, or you can even make sure that locally the satellite server is showing all the roles as active. If there's any kind of communication or kind of problems, you can look at that. We do have a CASA tester tool where you can use CASA tester tool for any sort of LDAP user authentication on the satellites. And also you can use monitor collection files processing where you can have a look at your on the ZENworks technician window. You can take a look at your collection process status to make sure there's no inventory messages or patches which are sitting in the folder and pending to process. That will ensure that your data is rolling up consistently, and you have the latest data or reports on the server side. And also you can have a look at your contents replication status on the technician app under ZENworks icon or technician application. You can see the content replication, make sure that there's not many remaining contents to sync. Typically, based on the schedules, you see that the contents is replicating periodically, but often we notice that after several days you have thousands of contents pending to replicate. That's something that needs attention. You can also force a replication through CDP command manually. And if you need to run a comparison between the satellite server content sync status against the parent primary, there's a pretty handy command called ZAC-CVC. So if there is any kind of content discrepancy, you can always run ZAC-CVC to make sure that content shows available for that bundles on the satellite and the server. So in ZCC, as I said before, you can go and look in the bundle satellite replication. Sometimes running CVC will force to update the content statuses back to the server and make that content available if the replication is already done. So of course, checking the disk space, where sometimes we have seen where admin doesn't know how much of disk space each satellite has, and then everything which is on the primary server try to get replicated to the satellite, and you run out of the disk space. So keeping an eye on the disk space definitely helps. You can look in the ZCC device inventory. You can generate a inventory report for all your satellite servers and take a look at if none of them are kind of critical on the disk space. And database health check is quite vital as well, where because database is the heart of the system holding all the core information. Watch for any sort of events or device communication or load during the peak hours. So make sure your database and log sizes are reviewed regularly, where sometimes we see that the database is not running because it ran out of disk, or there's some sort of changes that could prevent database to services to come up. So keep looking at the database services as well. If you have DBA, they can always monitor, but if it's not a external DBA owned database, then you can always keep an eye on the database. And then check for the time sync and any sort of integrity checks that you can also do for database using ZENworks diagnostic tool. It's called ZENworks Diagnostic Center. During maintenance schedules, always you need to have a backup plan where you can take periodic backup of your databases because that is important when you're doing upgrades and something goes wrong. You can always rely on backups and get things restored quickly. Rebuilding indexes is quite important because it can affect directly the performance of your zone, whether it's accessing ZCC or whether it's kind of request processing against database. So definitely try to rebuild your indexes, and there are documentation to show how to do that for each kind of database, and then you can plan to do that at least once a week if it is external and large environment, or at least once a month if it is a small environment. There are some dates and links that gives additional information about database that you can look at here, and definitely look at the best practices because that gives much more extensive information, what to monitor, what queries to run. Besides, if you don't have DBA, you can always get some sort of hands-on trying to run those queries and get some understanding, because if database is not healthy, overall your ZENworks zone will be underperforming. So it's good to keep an eye on the database time to time. You can always check a look under diagnostic as well, because that also shows your database statuses, whether it's running or what kind of size it is right now, which tables are on a higher side. Yeah.
And
So,
Arvind, some of those queries are in those TIDs for different maintenance?
Yes, some of those nodes are kind of defined in the TIDs. For the queries, they're in the best practices, like identifying what are the high CPU queries are running on my system. There's no particular one TID which kind of highlights all the health check queries, but will probably, depending on your environment and database type, we can provide those. If you need, you can just reach out to us. We can send you some queries detecting what are the high CPU queries, what are the high IO queries, what are the queries which are running at currently on my system, those kind of details.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so Some of the notes where you need to be aware to review the zone health check. What are some of the key areas that I should be aware of? You might have some certain subscriptions running where it could be your patch, your APN or VPP subscription or Linux user subscription that may be not completing successfully, and they may be not getting the contents available incorrectly. So do check the subscription statuses. Check for any kind of maintenance tasks that's running and that can be scheduled to run in the non-peak hours. That may reduce the load. You may be running some scripts to track some details that can be done on a scheduled basis on a non-peak hours. You can minimize your content replication schedules, like keep them not too close so that they're kind of not going back to the server very often, and keep them more in a non-aggressive way, or maybe balanced such that schedules collection, rollup, and device. For collection rollups or for content replication or for any sort of like device refreshes where device to refresh every 12 hours. So I would not recommend to keep it every 12 hours, every 3 to 4 hours. Zone underperformance. So in this case, what could be the reason for zone underperformance? Some things can keep in mind is when scaling your environment that can lead to zone underperform is if the resources are not adequately assigned. It may not be enough primary servers or satellites. Sometimes it could be slow responses with other servers, like database communication is slow, or your LDAP response is slow due to environment configuration. It could be latency or lack of maintenance or timeouts, or it could be multiple applications running on the same server. So those are some of the areas. Infrastructure restrictions can also pitch in and play a role sometimes where you see underperformance, and do check for best practices for any important recommendations or on tuning, on optimizing your environment. So if you have any questions, you can always email us and we will be able to guide you with the right set of recommendations depending on your environment. Awareness on the ZENworks environment changes. Be aware of what changes are happening behind your environment to measure the baseline and compare. Occasionally review your health of the zone by gathering statistics, as Paul mentioned earlier. Some of those data can help to identify if there is any kind of anomaly happening with that needs attention. Run reports regarding your content application for any kind of blackouts or exclusions. Identify large tables and do corrective maintenance for cleaning these up. And you can also leverage the dashboards to identify if there are any lost devices or non-active devices in the zone that can be retired or deleted. You can leverage ZCC and ZRS reporting tools to check for disk space or any other health indicators. You can automate many of those checks or tasks that you want to do using third-party tools and scripting for any sort of monitoring and notifications. So we have seen a lot of people do a lot of different sort of scripting to take care of maintenance of your zone and reporting these critical errors or any sort of notifications. So you can always do that. And it's always good to run some non-invasive commands where you can check the status of your ZENworks services, or you can view them in diagnostic, or you can also run this command to check the system status, where on the primary server it shows you all the status for the services running on the server. There's a link that is kind of given here in the doc that shows description of all the services.
Yeah, all these links should be live in the PDF, so you can click on these. Thanks, Arvind.
Yeah. Reviewing zone health, some of the areas could be related to take your collection for pending files. Collection is a role which is on the satellite server and primary server, so sometimes there'll be too many files sitting there. So ensure the collection is not lagging or stalled, impacting the ZenLoader process in the backend. Be aware of location and closest servers. Make sure that they're grouped into randomized agent requests to balance if you have multiple servers in the zone. So that way your one server is not getting hard and getting busy because of the too many agents talking to the same server. So do group them. Documentation will specify if there is any load balancing requirement for your environment, like for any other switches. ZENworks server access to micro-focused remote servers for patch downloads, online updates, and MDM server communications. These are all covered in the links that kind of hyperlink to this. So you can look at your restrictions that is allowing to go to the external servers for all these functionalities that you may be using depending on those. Schedule or have a process to regularly apply the OS security updates on the endpoint devices in a control process with the prior testing, because that helps to make sure that nothing is breaking when you try to patch your devices. So a quick testing on your lab devices might help to overcome any sort of problems that impact your zone environment, impact your zone devices. Remember that online updates for an appliance does have a dedicated channel for getting the security updates, so you don't have to look for SUSE channels to get a patch and to patch your appliances. And you definitely utilize your DBS help to check for any high utilization seen during the peak loads, and have a routine for health check queries or items, and there are a few listed in the documentation and as I mentioned in the presentation here. Some of you might have a firewall DMZ running on your ZENworks server, which might needs to be configured for allowing firewall for certain applications and certain features. So here is a small table that we're trying to just explain which are the areas where you might need certain ports to be allowed and restricted depending on your communication between primary server to other primary servers. It could be database and LDAP. So those are the standard ports. For database, there are individual ports that needs to have access because they definitely need to keep talking to database and other primary servers for internal tasks like content replication and other sort of server-to-server communication. So DMZ primary does need to have, if you're using active sync server for mobile management, then ZENworks and ZENworks MDM servers configured to perform those, then obviously you need to allow firewall to go through certain ports and certain set of external servers, Apple and Google server that should be not restricted in order to go through and perform the communication through DMZ server. For zone administration, ZCC tasks, there are default ports that's documented. You can look at those and you can allow access to only those ports and restrict for other ports. Restricting access to ZCC can be done if you have multiple servers and your DMZ server may not be having access for the remote users for the ZCC. So you can do ZCC restriction where any kind of remote users may not have to access ZCC to manage zone. They can always use the internal ZCC servers for doing that, or ZENworks server. For diagnostic purposes, allow access only to your ZENworks server, because for diagnostic reasons, we need the ZENworks servers to mutually talking to each other to report the statuses on services and resources for other servers. So enable those ports are active. Sorry about that. And always allow for appliances access to port 9443 for internal addresses of the admin devices. ZMan and Tomcat is totally an optional, where sometimes you may not have to always allow that, but if you need to be more restricted environment, you can even restrict those depending on what your organization policies are, and you can always control those. For ZENworks in the DMZ, you can have client web services where communication between server and agent, which does different sort of activities like registration, assignment, settings, and policies, needs port 443 to be enabled. For other services like content collection, which perform different actions, they need port 80. For authentication, you need port 8443. For MDM endpoint services, you need certain ports like 8443. And then for remote management, these are all the ports that's kind of covered here. For quick tasks, you need to make sure your agents are reachable on port 7628. That's where you can run quick tasks for device refresh, inventory, and bundles for any sort of agent communication from ZCC. For imaging related services, you may not need to have DMZ to have running these ports, so you can always restrict them. You can use other non-DMZ primary server for performing imaging tasks.
And again, I know this is a lot of ports, but there is a default section which was in the previous slide for seeing these ports for each of these services.
Correct. Yeah. So, and if you These restrictions are recommended only for external addresses, and you can always grant access to your internal addresses so that you're not restricting for everybody who is internally within your organization. And we also working on a document for DMZ that is being revised further. So it's not yet public, but there's an internal draft that can be shared on request if anyone, if you are going to implement DMZ for ZENworks server, just reach out to us. System update, we have often seen that this is very system update process in the product, which really allows you to adopt new features, support platforms, code fixes for stability with every releases that comes in. So before deploying the updates, ensure that the health of the primary servers and the database in the zone is conducive for deployment. Some of those checklists are covered here, where you need to make sure that you read the documentation, because sometimes this OS requirements or hardware configuration requirements or underlying requirements for like .NET or Java might change that may need you to go through the doc. Keep a backup before major OS upgrades, like your certificates, Zen server backup, your database backup that typically happens periodically, your imaging related backups if any of those are required. Deployment in a test or lab before production. So if you have a test or lab environment, you can always deploy that before running into production upgrade, so that you can validate the process and estimate the time. Check for any system update replication statuses. Sometimes your system update cannot be replicated. No other application or patches should be installing when you're running updates. So if you're running a concurrently patching your devices or trying to install any application, that should not happen when you're doing a system update on your devices, or if they're scheduled to run at a certain time. Do check for updated service, ZENworks updated service, which should be active and running on your Windows devices and primary servers. And you can run the command to check if it is responding or not. But otherwise, this service is required to do any update on the device, system update. After the update is done, you can verify the ZENworks version, make sure the version is current, and then system update status shows successful. You can run ZDC to verify for that version, for database and file integrity. They're all consistent. If there's any kind of discrepancy or missing in the report, you can reach out to support, and we can provide you with all the steps to fix those. Monitoring the status of services must be done. Sometimes we've seen that certain services didn't turn up because of certain reasons, and like imaging and functionality thereby doesn't work after upgrade. So make sure you check all your services after doing the upgrade. So one of the other things is, when you try to upgrade, which server do you want to upgrade? Those are the decisions that you might be already doing it, but just in case, make sure you have things ready with you, whether it's an administrator password, whether it could be GCC access or database access or database role, which server to upgrade. If you have multiple servers in the zone, you could do an upgrade on a server which is hosting a database. And how do you know that? You can go to diagnostic and check which server is running, which database my server is running on. Sorry, which server my database is running on. And then you can always look for the certificates. Make sure you don't do any certificate deployment or certificate remnant while the upgrade or system update is in progress. That might interfere with the update process. And you can always check them in database. You can check them using novel ZENworks configure option to see which server is running database to, but that's an additional way of doing it. Diagnostic is the easiest way to find that out. Certificate authority role, you can find master primary. Sometimes these are not really important unless if you have database external, you can deploy your updates to any one of those servers in the zone. But if database is sitting on a server 1, then you must try to update that server first. That will automatically, when you're updating that server, it'll stop services on the remaining servers during the system update process. So you don't have to go and stop services anymore for system updates. Sometimes we have seen that we must have to validate upgrade system requirement for any sort of disk availability on the primary server and database server. And in doing so, plan for adequate growth and scaling over time, because we have often seen that when we try to deploy an appliance and VS storage is restricted to 60 gig, sometimes they run out of disk because over the time the system grows. So always plan to have adequate disk space. Controlling disk space where you can do some sort of key contributors to help disk control disk space are avoid storing unrelated data under ZENworks volumes or disk. Monitor disk usage in diagnostic occasionally. That can give you a lot of warning if it's running critical. Clean up the stale work files in the backup. So and excessive processing on files in collection folders like status, messages, inventory that can also impact the disk space. So you make sure there are not many files waiting there. To clean up, you can always look at certain things that we have mentioned here. Like if you're running critical on disk space, you can always delete the older system updates, and do not set the system update to download automatically in ZCC. You can set that. You can set that to just check for updates and not download the updates. Configure logging to limit the logs for sizes and backups. Do clear older logs if need to be, and watch out for if any memory dumps are created with HPROF extensions on your file system. It can be removed unless there is a potential issue going on with your performance. Remove older and unused images if they're not being used, or any kind of unused bundles in the zone. Configure patch management to keep only selective vendor patches and perform and the platforms that you need, like only for Windows. You don't need Linux or Mac, then you can just take that. Applicable patches, you can only consider applicable patches for your zone. You don't have to download all the patches. Save deletion of superseded files. Sometimes if you're still having problems, you can always perform deletion of superseded files within installed downloads folders. So from now, I'll hand over to Paul to continue here.
Well, I wasn't really trying to push you through. For some reason, we got some default settings here. So sorry about that, Arvin, with some of those slides. Yeah, so some of the, thank you, Arvin, for going through that. That's a big chunk and a lot of detail. We're going to go into tips and tricks about our health, and logging is a big part of it, right? ZENworks logs can be another source of monitoring. They can reveal issues that may be causing suboptimal performance. Consider reviewing them periodically, especially if you're experiencing some type of change in performance or something. And remember, having that baseline is always good, because then you can reference back. Review, see, it's even doing it on me. Review troubleshooting videos for more information about logs. Location, understanding the log specifically. Set the debug logs during an issue so you capture the issue when the logs are in debug. This will help in analyzing the issue. There's the ZENinfo captures it, and you can also run the ZENinfo on your primary. Now, it makes it much bigger, but it also captures those service messages and those loader messages logs all in one ZENinfo if you should need to do that on a primary server. Some other tips and tricks would be connecting or checking content integrity, content repo versus database, and correcting the status. So there's a command here that you can do for check content system, and making sure that the content recorded in the database is the same as what's the content actually physically on the file system. Automate ZCM services restart. Excuse me. Restart for Linux is here, so you can do a restart action. Viewing system bundles in ZCC, you can see the PRU and the TFTP. You can see the changes. These types of changes you want to make sure is under support supervision. But when you're appending these particular URLs, but there's a series of commands you can do for that, and you can just ring us up to see what that is if it pertains to your particular issue. Monitoring ZENworks loader from the top queue action, if it's a failed status. So this will give you a queue list and actually tell you, actually monitor the top, the loader. Unprocessed collection files count. Here's another command for Linux if you're not familiar with it, and can check for files on the primary that's older than 2 hours. So that kind of gives you some details on those collection files. Server log analysis, parser tools. There's SM parse out there, and there's a TID represented here, and that can tell you if you have slow content, slow logins. It's a real handy tool to see as a user's logging in if it's slow, or what the impact is. Is it because of a refresh? Is it because of authentication, and so forth? So those are very handy to have. And then recording zone health checklist for a company. Having company documentation for your zone will help you considerably, especially as your zone evolves and new features are put in place. And here's an example of zone health checklist. And remember, this is a living document, so this is going to evolve over time. You want to, some things that would go along with this is running a ZDC and keeping it for a baseline so that you have, you know, the condition or the state after or before a particular update or upgrade. The diagnostic page, a full zone view, is real time. And then you can also audit events and track events that are historical through the audit event system. And then ZCC hot lists, and then error messages, ZCC error messages in the ZCC log. So these can all help in at least getting a baseline, and then you can compare to later should you need to, if you have some impact on your system, to see what's going on. Here's some support references that we have for like ZENworks 2017 Update 4, the documentation, also downloads and fixes for Update 4, as well as some highlights like the README, the new stuff that's come into Update 4. There's a ZENworks 2017 Upgrade Cookbook with this TID here, and that has, if you're doing upgrades or system updates, if you go here, it has details on step-by-step and links to the documentation, so you don't have to have 5 different documents open going between them. You can go down this step and at least get close to where you need to go for referencing for your upgrade or update. And it also has ZENworks downloads and ZDC download links and video links for important reminders and system requirements. So this is a very handy cookbook tool or TID. And then we have the Micro Focus YouTube channel for ZENworks. A lot of good stuff being placed out there by support and development. And then there's training out there, which has some free videos out there, as well as if you don't have the on-demand subscription, you could still get to the free videos. But there's also the other architect videos and others coming soon. Support knowledge base, of course, for your TIDs, and you can also access your profile and documentation from there as well. And then finally, for all of you, the community forums, very important, being able to talk with colleagues and understanding what your peers are doing and asking questions through those processes so that you can collaborate, get some great references and information that way. Finally, call to action. That sums up this particular presentation, but call to action is what's new in ZENworks Service Desk 8.1 is coming up, and you can register here for August 22nd to see what's coming in Service Desk 8.1, and then also the Sybase database to Postgres database migration process and best practices webinar is coming up in September, early September after the holiday. And this will give you a good idea of what you need to do on your 2017 system in order to upgrade to 2020 because Sybase isn't supported on 2020. So at some point, either while you're on 2017 or just before you move to 2020, you need to migrate your database. If you have an internal Sybase database, you'll need to move that. And most of all, I want to thank everyone here being able to come in today and be here. Are there any questions, I know this is a lot to throw at you, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant, but any questions out there regarding what you might have questions on? I don't see anything coming in chat.
Oh, I tried to answer some of them from the
Thank you.
You might have to look at some of these questions. Says, does it void any warranty to install an agent-based monitoring software? Well, as long as it doesn't impact ZENworks functionality, you can always have it on the endpoint devices or managed devices to monitor any sort of agent activities. But it should not restrict or like any sort of antivirus or something which restrict activities within the agent folder. That shouldn't be done. That will affect the ZENworks functionality. And that is how to eliminate non-compliant count on device hot list. I clicked on the number and it takes me to the device and I never see a problem. But I never see a problem. Can I force the count to be 0? Actually, this compliance is computed periodically in the database. So this is once you have the errors for your bundles and policies, I think when you delete them, those errors are taken action to remove those, and the next compliance engine runs, it will clear those and make it 0. Because that's something that totally depends on how these bundles and policies or device errors are shown for this hot list view. So that way you can clear those up. You can always contact support if you need. If you see that there's a need to clear this up and that's not working, we can always help you with those. We will look at those changing dynamically in future, see if there is something that we can take an action from here, Vikram, so that we can correct those non-compliant alerts or flags, so it's not kind of giving any misleading data to the end users.
Yes, sure. We should look into it.
So the question is, is Zen 2017 support for SQL 2019? Currently, we don't do that. We only support until SQL 2017. We don't support it for 2020. Are you aware, Vikram, if we support 2019 SQL?
I don't recollect off on top of my head, Arvind.
So I have to check with the DBAs how they have whether it's possible to run in compatibility view, compatibility mode, and not SQL 2019 mode, because there may be certain things that we might need testing, and without that we can officially tell you that this would work for 2017 with all the functionalities. But we will get back to you, Igor, on that. So in our environment, we use Zavix for monitoring. Can I install Zavix agent on the appliances? So we had internal discussion on this, and then under our EULA, we kind of restrict that to have any external agent running for monitoring on, especially on the appliances. So that's something that maybe Vikram, you can clarify. But as I heard from Vikram Goel, that that's something that we prevent end users from installing Zavix on the appliances. It could be Zavix, it could be third-party software, it could be licensed product or licensed software that probably is not allowed to run on appliances because of the licensing or legal issues.
Yes, that's correct, Arvind. So appliance has to be solely used only for the purpose of running ZENworks, not other tools. That's why we provide the Ganglia and other tools in the appliance console.
Yeah, but if something comes with our distribution, like we had a request for SNMP agent packages, and that kind of provided in 2020. So if you want to do monitoring through SNMP, that's possible, I think, in later appliances.
Again, that would be an ideas portal question. That would be great to put out there.
Yeah. To check for the content integrity, there is a command called novel ZENworks configure -c check content system. So you can use that. I think it's also in the doc, but this is just a command that you can run. It needs to be run on the primary server, and it will create logs to tell you the discrepancy between the contents which are available in the file system and not in the database, and vice versa, where content could be available in the database state and the status stays available, but the files are actually missing in the file system. So you could do that using this command. You can look for the doc with there is a way to force the sync. I think one of our slides do capture it, where how you can force them to be in sync. So there is a switch called sync db equal to true. If you pass that, it will not only create a report, but it will also force you to sync the changes between your content repo and your database.
I don't
So
see it
Paul is
readily. I'll
looking
see
for
if I
that.
can find it. Yeah. It is documented. It's really good information, the DB sync. It'll check for orphans on one side or the other. So if the database thinks it has something that the file system doesn't, or vice versa, the file system has something that the database doesn't record, you can then select to have those orphans cleaned up, depending on which way you want to go for that particular content. I don't see it here though. It's in the slide, Barry.
Okay, and the other question is, does it void any warranty to install an agent-based monitoring software? Again, this is related from Keith. Vikram, any thoughts on that? Or Paul?
We'll have to get back on that, Arvind.
Okay, so as of now, anything external that for an agent, it's is for agent or a server which is not an appliance, it's totally fine. It's just that with an appliance, there are restrictions which are, as per the legal restrictions, we are not allowing you to install any third-party applications, because that might interfere with the appliance functionalities, or in future updates something goes wrong, then that's something that calls for testing. But you can always put a request or request us, and then we can route it through PM again, and then check if there is an alternative option or workaround to achieve those, and I'll get back to you on that. So I'll take a note of this question and get back to you, Keith. Is there anything I missed to answer, or something that
I believe a couple of questions were on the presentation slides for all the attendees. So we have the handout section in the webinar tool. Hopefully you should be able to find that, and you have the PDF in that.
Okay, so another question from Luke is, it would be nice to cover also the bundle best practices for performance. Is it having many bundle requirements and requirement sets slow down? Yes, definitely that's a good point. I think we might try to cover a separate session for bundle session where you can cover all this thing in future, totally a dedicated webinar topic where we can talk about some of those areas on bundles and bundle groups and what is the best practices. There have been some presentations around that in past. What are the bundle deployment best practices? I can send you those links for reference. So I'll make a note of this. So SNMP packages, SNMP agent packages are already there on the later appliances, but we have done it for 2020 for on request. So we can give you those details, which packages are required, and they're part of distribution, so you don't have to really go externally. But there has been a bug and defect to get them in 2020 next version of appliance by default, so your user don't have to look for those packages and install them manually because they comes from distribution directly.
I put the TID 7008193 is the one for the database orphans.
Okay.
So reference that.
Yeah, and for the tickets, limitations on the On the support tickets, what we can do is something that that we can work with us, and we can try to refund if that ticket is not relevant, something related to your issues, but it's just like a request or clarifications or questions around this kind of topics that we have talked about. Then we can definitely, you can directly email us in our email addresses, and we can try to clarify those, and you don't have to come to us through a ticket for these questions. For any kind of production issues, definitely that's required, and if it's a bug, we will always refund you the ticket, so you don't have to worry about those aspects. Crash services on the satellites, you can know using are you running. If the services are not running, typically it's an agent service, but if the agent service is not running, you can come to know through are you running directly. A PB server and DHCP, yes, you need to check manually. You cannot know through are you running these services. There's no way to get these services remotely to know their statuses. Postgres, yes, comes in the distribution. In SLEST 12, there's already 10.x versions which are available, so you can use that. 2020, or we also shipped our own Postgres within 2020 media, so you can even do that, and there's a migration process to move. I think the rest of the questions are, does the same agent rationale goes with the HP data protector? I think any sort of, we're kind of restrictive to install any applications, external third-party applications on appliance. That's a general bottom line thing. So so if you don't want to, if something comes within distribution, we can try to consider that, but something external license or third-party, that definitely has to go through our legal process and get approval before we can give you an official answer. So yes, I will wait on the answer from product management to clarify if there's something that we can do, because I see a lot many requests coming around these directions. We have to take a look and then come back.
Yes, I think that's the right thing what you said, Arvind. So we'll have to check on the request, and based on case by cases, we could look into it. But in general, appliance restrict any other tool running based on the licensing what we have for that.
Yeah, so we will try to reach out to you guys with all those possible things separately.
Valerie had a question about getting the PDF. So you can email me if you can't download the PDF, and I'll be happy to send it back out. We're at the top of the hour. Any other important questions that we want to cover? Arvind, do you see any?
I think there's one says SNMP monitoring guide. So do we have one that we can share?
I can look for it.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead and email me also with that, and we can get that to you.
Okay.
Get any details. Again, we hope we covered most of your questions you might have had coming into this webinar, but this PDF is available, and email me if you can't get it downloaded, but feel free to reach out to Arvind and I for an email, and we really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, and then any questions, just come to us. We'll try to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.